So we are learning on the Nun Amid Aleph. We are about halfway down. We're starting to learn about Gzeir Shava. Um, what about is the din? Davar love Gzeir Shava. It's Chayzam Lam Gzeir Shava. We're learning as Chus for Shlem if we learn Chayav Asarach. Zok the Gemara. Davar Lam Gzeir Shava Mao Shi Yilmid Behekish. So can you learn out something that was learned out first with the Gzeir Shava? Can you go and learn it out from there with the Hekish? Amar Papa v'Zayis Zevach Hashlam Imal Toida. The Torah says this is a long pasuk, which, a taida is generally a carbon that's brought in the form of a shlamim, but it has additionally a couple additional rules. One of them is that it has a bunch of chales. You bring a bunch of different types of chales, a bunch of different types of bread-like things along with it. So let's see the pasuk. V'zois Torah zevach hashlam masha yikrav l'Hashem im al taida yakrivenu. If your shlamim is a taida, v'ikriv al zevach ha-taida, together with the carbon, chalas, matzos, belulos, bashemen. We're going to talk about three different types of chales, so to speak. So one is chalas, matzos, belulos, bashemen. One is chalas made of matzos, or kike matzos, meshucham bashemen. And then there's like a flatter, more like traditional matzos. The first one was chalas matzos, are slightly expanded, more like a pita. The next one is more like our matzah, a flat cracker type of thing. And the third one is a type of taida, a chalas taida, that was made with boiled flour. They would take the flour and boil it, and then they would bake that. So those are the three things that the Torah mentions. If you'll notice, it's going to be relevant for later. It doesn't say on all of them the same lashon. The first one it says chalas matzos. The first one is both chalas and matzos. And the next one is Rekike Matzos. It doesn't say anything about, it says Chalas Matzos, it doesn't say anything about Silas. The next one says Rekike Matzos. It doesn't say either Silas or Chalas. And the last thing it says, the Silas Muvachas Chalas Beluz Hashem. The last one it says Silas and Chalas. So we're going to darshan a lot of things from the way there that this is said. Zok the Gemara. V'zois Torah zevach Hashem mal toida zok the Mishnah. Zok the Gemara. I'm sorry. Lamanu l'toida sheba min ha'maisa. That tells you that a carbon toida can be brought the chalis. I'm sorry, not the chalis. The actual carbon itself. If a person has maisa sheni, he can take the money to Yerushalayim and use that to buy a toida, a carbon toida. And the ashkan shlam da asami maisa. From the fact that we find that shlam can also come from maisa sheni. Shlam gufayu min alahu, min alam. Where do we know that a shlam could be brought from Meiser Sheni? When they say sham sham, it's a gzeir shava. The Torah says sham by shlamim, and it says sham by Meiser Sheni. So that tells you that the shlamim can be brought using your Meiser Sheni money. If you grew a bunch of produce and you have to take 10% to Yerushalayim, and you sold it and you brought the money to Yerushalayim, you can use that to buy a shlam, and that's what that from gzeir shava. And then we learned from Shlomim, told you that Taida, since there's a hekesh of Shlomim to Taida, that tells you that Taida also could be brought from Maisha Sheni. So you see that something that was learned first with the Gzeir Shava of Sham Sham can then be learned out from Shlomim to Taida with a hekesh. Amle Zuta Breder of Mari Ravina, Maisa Dog and Chulabi Amahu. He says, what are you talking about? This is not kachrim, this is chulin, because the original source where we're getting this all from, it's sham sham from Meiser Sheni. That's Meiser Sheni is not kachrim, it's chulin. I mean, it's not chulin per se. It's not chulin. It's not, you're not allowed to be metamet, but it's chulin connected kachrim of the mizbeach, kachrim mizbeach. Amalei, Amar Lamed Kodesh, Malamed Kodesh. He said back to him, Ravina said back to him, that's not a kasha. Whoever said it has to be both the thing that you're learning from and the thing that you're learning to in order for it to be kachim as opposed to chulin. He says, no, as long as any part of it is kachim, even though the lama, the original source, the thing that you're learning it from, is not kachim, it's still considered kachim, and you could still bring a raya from here that you can learn out. Davar alamed behekesh, davar alamed gzeir shava, Chayzam Malamed Behekesh. Now we move on to the next thing. Davar lam b'gzeir shava ma'al sheyomid b'gzeir shava. Right? That's always the second thing. The first thing is hekesh. The second thing is gzeir shava. And we're in the part of this Gemara. We're talking about things that were originally learned with the gzeir shava. So something was lam b'gzeir shava ma'al sheyomid b'gzeir shava. Amar Rav bar Chama Tanya. Silas meruvachas. The bottom of that pasuk that we said, right? We said there were three different types of loaves that were brought. So the last one was, it said, the soilas meruvachas, flour that was boiled, chalos, and made into chalos. Lamanu l'revucha sheba soilas. That tells you that these boiled flour loaves were made with soilas. Chalos minayin. How do we know the ones that are chalos? That was the first one that we mentioned in the pasuk. The ones that were not rikikas, that were not flat wafers, but the ones that were the loaves that were more like chalos. How do we know that they also need to be out of silas? Tamalei mechalis chalas. We learned in Gzeir Shava. It says chalos by the first one. It says chalas by revuchas. So that tells you the silas that it says by revucha also applies to chalas. Rikikin minayin. What about the rikikin? By rikikin, it doesn't say chalas. That's the middle one in the pasuk. How do you know that that also needs silas? Tamalei matzis. We learned that at Gzeir Shava from the chalas. So this is the revucha. It says silas and it says matzis. I'm sorry, it says revuchas, it says silas and it says chalas. And it says by chalas, it says chalas, it also says chalas, obviously. So we make a gzeir shava from revuchas to chalas, and then we make another gzeir shava of matzos, which it doesn't say by revuchas, but it does say by chalas. So it goes from chalas to rikikin. So you see, a gzeir shava is learned out with the second. You learn one gzeir shava, and you learn out a second chain gzeir shava, second step gzeir shava. Zok the Gemara, no, that's not a raya. Dilma me'afe tanu gama. There's another type of challah, a tanu ma'afe tanu, or one that's baked in the oven, and maybe they're not baked in a pan. And over there it says matzah.
Did you skip Amalei Ravina?
I'm sorry, yeah. Amalei Ravina, mimai de matzah michalas gamar. How do we know that we're using matzah gzeir shava from chalas? Which then chalas itself had to be learned out with Gzeir Shav before that. Dilma me ma'afei tana gomer. It says by ma'afei tana, it says directly silas, and it says matzeh. So therefore, you could learn out the rikikin directly from ma'afei tana. Or you don't have to go through a two-step Gzeir Shav. Ela marava Tanya. We have to have a different source for the din of Gzeir Shava followed by another Gzeir Shava. It says v'kirvayu prosha. The Torah says legabe. I think this is the par koyin Mashiach. It says that you should take the insides and its wastes, v'hoitzi, and you take it out. And it really says a lot more. The pasuk lists all the different parts of the carbon you take out. Ves ora par ves kol b'sari al roishav al karav v'kirvayu pershoy. And you burn it over there. But in any case, we make a gzeir shava from the word v'kibra, pirshay, I think. Can't read it, it's too small. Yeah, upirshay. That tells you that it should be taken out in its entirety. Because it says kol habasar, I think. It's kol hapar. Yachal yisrafenu shalom. Maybe you should, once you take it outside, you should then burn it as an entire animal. It says over here with its head and with its and its feet, and it says also by an oila, regular oila, roishay ukarav. Nemal alon roishay ukarav. Mal alon ayidini tuach. Just like the oila gets cut up before it's burnt on the mizbeach. Also, this par hanisrafim that gets taken outside to the makam hadeshin. Also, you have to take it out whole, like we said, kol par before. But once you got there, you have to cut it up before you burn it. Zak Gemara, Imal Alam behefshit, Av Kanam behefshit. By Oila, you need hefshit. The Pasuk says that you should skin it before burning it. Maybe also over here you should skin it before burning it. Tamalaymai, the Kirba Upirshay. My Talmud. How does Kirba Upirshay tell you that it's not skinned? Amra Papuk, Shem Shapirshay Bekirvai, just like the waist is inside of the insides of the animal. You don't take out the waist. That would be very unsightly and inappropriate. Kach psare ba'oirei. So too, the basar stays inside the oir of the paralim par kayin mashiach when it's taken out to the makam hadeshen and it's burnt in its skin in the same way. Latanya. So, okay, so we learned that out with Gzeira Shava. We learned that Gzeira Shava that it's not that it's burnt shalim. That it has to. I'm sorry. That has to be cut up before it gets burnt. We learn out from Gzeira Shava from Oila. The Tanya Rebbe Yomer Nemakan Oir Ubasar and it says Uparash. This is talking about the soyer, the parvisor of Yom Kippur. V'nemal alon Oir Ubasar Uparash, and it says by what we were just talking about the Parka in Mashiach. It says these same words. So we make a Gzeira Shava that tells you from what we just learned by Parkai and Mashiach from a regular oila, then we transport it to the Parvisar of Yom Kippur. So you see, you make a Gzeira Shava, a second Gzeira Shava to learn out what was originally learned with the Gzeira Shava. We first learned out that it needs nituach before you burn it by a par Kohen Gadol from an oila, and then we learn out from par Kohen Gadol to par Visar Shel Yom Kippur, the same day. So we learned out that the Davar Alam B'Gzeira Shava is Chayzam Lamed B'Gzeira Shava by Kachim. Now move on to the next thing. This one is this is really the next one that's very interesting. Dama Halamed B'Gzeira Shava Maushi Yomud B'Kal V'Chaymer. What's the din of something that was learned first with the Gzeira Shava to learn it again with the Kal V'Chaymer? So he's like, I'll teach it to you from a Kal V'Chaymer. Uma Hekesh She'ena Melamed B'Hekesh. This is why I went back and learned from the beginning. So a Hekesh cannot be learned, cannot be Chayzim Melamed B'Hekesh, even the Rav be the Ravina, like we saw back on the previous Amud on actually a blot before this, that it says Midirava or the Ravina. We had two shatim of where we see that. Even so a Hekesh can't be Melamed another Hekesh. Melamed B'Kal V'Chaymer B'Tan Rebbe Shmuel. Like we said at the top of the previous summit, that we saw from a Gemara a couple of weeks ago, that the Tan Rebbe Shmuel, that they hold that Davar Alam B'Hekesh can be Chayzim Melamed B'Kal V'Chaymer. Gzeira Shava Hamalamedes B'Hekesh Midira Papa. Gzeira Shava that we said can be learned out with which you can learn out with the Hekesh Midira Papa, like we said before. Ain't it in Shetilmid B'Kal V'Chaymer? Like we saw in the previous Amud, right? We said can Gzeira Shava then be learned with the Hekesh? So we said we wanted to bring a raya that that's the case. So you have a Kal V'Chaymer. So we said that we ended up with a machlekes about this. It was a machlekes Ravina Mazutra about whether we agree to a papa. Does it apply even? Can you learn out from there? He said whether it was considered to be something that was in kachim or not. So it wasn't clear that davar halamad be Gzeira Shava can go be melamed with a hekesh. Ela Kal V'Chaymer. So I'll bring you a different Kal V'Chaymer to tell you this rule that davar halamed b'Gzeira Shava can be chayzer melamed b'Kal V'Chaymer. I'll make a different Kal V'Chaymer. Ma hekesh she'ein melamed b'hekesh. A hekesh, like we said, even the Rav Adu Ravina, the original din, that hekesh cannot be learned out with another hekesh. Nevertheless, we did say that you couldn't. Where we first tried to say from Gzeira Shava, which was the second one of the options, but the third thing that we learned earlier was that a davar halamed bekal v'chaymer, behekesh can be learned out with kal v'chaymer, like Thunder Baby Shmuel says. Gzeir shava. So gzeir shava. So we said that gzeir shava can learn out to a kal v'chaymer and not to a hekesh. Gzeir shava hamalam ledis gzeir shava. A gzeir shava that's able to learn out from its own thing. If a hekesh cannot learn out, you can have two hekeshim together. But Gzeir Shava, you could have two Gzeir Shavas together. That's what we just started this whole sequence with. Like we saw at the first one of these limudim by Gzeir Shava. So that's the Gzeir Shava. The final thing of Gzeir Shava is Davar Alam Gzeir Shema Ben Yinav. Take them. The Gemara throws up its hand and says, "We don't really have an answer for that one. We don't know what the answer is for that." Okay, so we've covered Hekesh, and we've covered Gzeir Shava, right? We learned a Hekesh, learned out from a Hekesh. We said the rules. Hekesh cannot learn out from another Hekesh. It cannot learn out a Hekesh to and followed by a Gzeir Shava. It can learn a Hekesh followed by a Kal V'chaymer, and a Binyanav we didn't have an answer for. And the same thing by Gzeir Shava, by learning out from a Gzeir Shava, we also threw up our hands by the Binyanav. Now we're going to Kal V'chaymer. What's the din if something goes first learned out with a Kal V'chaymer to learn out with a Hekesh? You have to realize these things are not reversible. Just because we said before that according to Tana the Baby Shmuel, you can learn out first with a Hekesh and then with a Kal V'chaymer, doesn't mean you could first learn out with a Kal V'chaymer and then a Hekesh. It's different things. There's a difference between a Lamed and a Malamed. So David halamad bekal v'chaymer. If you first learn out with a kal v'chaymer, can you learn out with a hekesh kal v'chaymer? Umag gzeir shava. If a gzeir shava she'ena lameida behekesha, which cannot be learned out from a hekesh, like we said, right? This is saying it a little backwards. A gzeir shava, which if you had learned first learned out something from a hekesh, you cannot learn it as a gzeir shava. Midir Rabbi Yochanan, right? I think I got that right. Right, like we saw from Rabbi Yochanan back on the previous blot. Nevertheless, Gzeir Shava Melamed behekesh. It can't be learned out from a hekesh, but a Gzeir Shava can teach something to a hekesh, and then the hekesh can convey it over to the next thing. Midira Papa, like we saw from Kal V'chaymer halamed behekesh. A Kal V'chaymer that is able to be learned from a hekesh. But the Tana Rabbi Shmuel, like Rabbi Shmuel said, "Ain't the din sheyilmad behekesh." Certainly, it should be able to be learned from a hekesh. But tomorrow again, we have the same problem. Hanichlamanda islay der papa, lamanda lesser der papa, mayika lameima. Zok tomorrow teku. Ain't a chanami. We don't have a good raya whether a davar halamed bekal v'chaymer can be chayza malamed behekesh. This one, the next one is very interesting. Davar halamed bekal v'chaymer. I'm sorry, that's not the next one after that. Davar halamed bekal v'chaymer mash yilmed b'gzeir shava. What's it then? Something that was learned with the kal v'chaymer to learn with the gzeir shava. Kal v'chaymer. So we'll say kal v'chaymer. Umag gzeir shava. If a gzeir shava she'ena lemeida behekesha, you cannot learn out a hekesh to tell you a gzeir shava midur Rabbi Yochanan. Like we said all the way at the beginning, that was the third thing that we learned, that hekesh can't be. You can't first have a hekesh and then a gzeir shava. Melamed b'gzeir shava, but still a hekesh can be learned from a gzeir shava midur Rabbi bar Chama, like we said from Rabbi bar Chama. Kal v'chaymer halamed behekesh. A kal v'chaymer, which that a kal v'chaymer which can be learned from a hekesh. The Tana Rishmal ain't a dinsha to lamed b'gzeir shava. Certainly, you should be able to teach a gzeir shava, and that seems to be a valid kal v'chaymer. Finally, davar halamed kal v'chaymer ma'ashi yilmed b'kal v'chaymer. What's the din to have something learned out from a kal v'chaymer and then teach it to another kal v'chaymer? So we say we can learn it out itself from a kal v'chaymer. Umag gzeir shava she'ena lameida behekesh. If a gzeir shava, which is not able to be learned from a hekesh, midur Rabbi Yochanan, melamed bekal v'chaymer, right? Gzeir shava she'ena lameida behekesh. I think that means it cannot be Yeah, it cannot be learned from a hekesh. Rabbi Yochanan Malamed the Kal V'Chaimer Kedei Amaron. Nevertheless, a Gzeir Shava, like we just said earlier on this Amid, a Gzeir Shava can be learned out by Kal V'Chaimer. That's the thing. Right before the Binyan Av, which we left Bateko, we said that you can learn out. We were a good Kal V'Chaimer to tell you that a Kal V'Chaimer can, a Gzeir Shava can learn to a Kal V'Chaimer. Kal V'Chaimer Halamad Mehekesh. The Thunder Bishmal Kal V'Chaimer that can be learned out from Hekesh. Any din sheyilmud b'Kal V'Chaimer. Certainly, you should be able to learn from a Kal V'Chaimer. Should be able to teach to a Kal V'Chaimer. So the Gemara says, "V'zel Kal V'Chaimer ben Kal V'Chaimer." So the way I have a little bit of a hard time understanding the way Rashi understands it, but Rashi says this is you're learning out this whole din that a Kal V'Chaimer can be learned out from another Kal V'Chaimer. You're learning it out from a Kal V'Chaimer, right? We just said a Kal V'Chaimer to teach this rule. So this Kal V'Chaimer is learned out itself. This din is learned out from a Kal V'Chaimer. The Gemara objects to that, but this is not a din that's learned out from Kal V'Chaimer. It's ben benoishal Kal V'Chaimer, because the original din that davar halamad, that which Gzeir Shava is not lameda behekesh of Rabbi Yochanan, that was learned out using a Kal V'Chaimer. That then was gebayt on a Kal V'Chaimer. So it's really four Kal V'Chaimers. It's a ben benoishal Kal V'Chaimer. It's not just that you're learning out this din from a Kal V'Chaimer. The basis for this Kal V'Chaimer is also a Kal V'Chaimer. So you have essentially four Kal V'Chaimers here. That's why Rashi understands the question. Taisa's way of understanding the question makes a little more sense to me. Taisa says it's a circular reasoning. We're trying to teach that a Kal V'Chaimer can be learned from a Kal V'Chaimer. But the way we're doing it is we're saying a Kal V'Chaimer from the din of Rabbi Yochanan, based on the din of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's din is based on a Kal V'Chaimer. So you're basing the din that a Kal V'Chaimer can be learned from a Kal V'Chaimer that's learned from a Kal V'Chaimer. How can you do such a thing? You can't learn something using the process that's at issue. It's very fascinating. Whenever you have a vicious cycle, a circular reasoning, it always gets me excited. So we have to say a different Kal V'Chaimer. Ela Kal V'Chaimer. Uma hekesh she'ein lomed behekesh. If a hekesh cannot be learned from a hekesh, even the Rav and Midaravina, from one of the two pshatim that we said right at the beginning. Malamed b'Kal V'Chaimer Tani Rabbi Shmuel still can be learned with a Kal V'Chaimer. Kal V'Chaimer halamed mehekesh midatani Rabbi Shmuel. A Kal V'Chaimer that can be learned from a hekesh from Tani Rabbi Shmuel. Any din sheyilmed b'Kal V'Chaimer. V'zeu Kal V'Chaimer ben Kal V'Chaimer. This is not two steps of Kal V'Chaimer because we're no longer using. We're talking about only Tani Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Rav and Ravina. Neither of them are dependent on using Kal V'Chaimer. They learn it out from other types of limudah. But before, when we wanted to say from Rabbi Yochanan Taka used the Kal V'Chaimer, and that made it into another that this limud that we're making, this Kal V'Chaimer that we're making, to tell you the rule of Kal V'Chaimer ben Kal V'Chaimer was also a Kal V'Chaimer ben Kal V'Chaimer itself. Finally, Davar Lam Kal V'Chaimer Rashi Yom Binyan Av. What's the din? Something that's learned as a Kal V'Chaimer to be learned out with a Binyan Av. Amrav Yirmiyah Toshma Malak V'Nimtzas Treif. So the din is, we know. By the way, anyone who has to leave, I know I started quite a while ago, but I want to keep our momentum in this Gemara. I don't think you want to start it again tomorrow morning. So we all know that you're not allowed to eat a treifa. A treifa is an animal that has an imperfection that causes that it won't be able to live. But we use the word treifa sort of loosely. We said things are treif. But treifa means that specific thing, something that's unable to be eaten. Nevela is a separate thing from treifa, right? Nevela is an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly. The din of a nevela, in addition to being treifa you can't eat, and nevela you can't eat, but there's a difference between them, and the nevela is also tameh. So we're going to talk about what happens with a malika. A malika is what you do for a bird that's being brought as a carbon. Instead of shechting it with our shechita with a knife, the kohen crushes it with his nail, with his thumb. So this is the malak. If someone did malika on an animal for a carpet, benimtzas treif, and it turns out it's treif, it doesn't get the tuma of a nevela. The nevela of a is when a bird is treif, there's different a treif, a literal treif, and not our treif, but the that has the simonim of a treifa. It or an avela, I'm sorry, I should say. An animal that's an avela, it's metama bebeis habli. A bird only is metama when you swallow it. It's not metama from touching and eating it. So he says, if you did malika on a bird for a carbon, and it turns out to be treifa, it doesn't get the tumas nevela because you did this equivalent of a shchita by doing malika on it. And any animal that you do shchita on is not a nevela. It's only a nevela if it didn't get a shchita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mitama bebeis habliya. Rabbi Yehuda says it is mitama bebeis habliya. It's treated as if it was an aveil. Didn't get a shchita. Amar Rameya kal v'chaymer. Rameya says I could bring you a kal v'chaymer to prove that it's not tamei. Uman avelis behema shemitama b'magu amasa. A behema, we said that a oif is mitama with nevela when you swallow it. But a regular animal, as we know, if it's tamei, if it becomes an avela, it becomes tamei just by touching it or carrying it. Shitase mitaras trefasa mitumasa. If by an animal which has a higher sensitivity to tuma, that it could even be mitama by mago masa. When you do shchit on it, it loses its status. When if you have a treifa that you shechted, it's no longer tamei. Nevelis oif she'em mitam magumasa. It's only mitam beis habliya. And it is shechtitasa and mitaras treifasa mitumasa. Certainly, when you do a shchita, it should be mitar from its tuma. And ma'amatzina b'shchita shem kashosa ba'achila mitaras treifasa mitumasa. And just like so, that was the first step. We made a kal v'chaymer, and then we said, just like we find that by a shchita, that it makes it kosher v'achila, and if it's a treifa, it stops it from being tamei. Af malika shebachshatam ba'achila, the tar treifasa mitum masay. So you can make a binyanav to tell you that just like the shchita of a behema takes away the tuma of a treifa by shechting it, so the malika should also do the same thing. So it's a kal v'chaymer, which tells you that a behema, that if you shecht an animal, if you shecht the bird, it's not going to be tamei, right? If you instead of doing a malika, if you just take a regular bird and you shecht and you find that it's a treif, it doesn't get a din avela. So too, we follow that was a binyanav that even by malika it shouldn't be mitama. Rabbi Yossi Amedaya knivlis behema tahirish shtasa matarasa v'loy malikasa. Says no, you can't learn out. You're trying to make a mematzinu. You try to make a kal v'chaymer. If you were to be moilik a behema, it would not become tar from nevela. It would certainly be a nevela. The malika doesn't do anything. It's just killing an animal. So now this part of the Gemara is very hard to read into the pshat that Rashi says, but we'll read the Gemara and then we'll see Rashi. V'loi hasam tihavi, v'loi hi hasam tihavi hi mishchita dechul kashin. Sak Rashi in the top Rashi. V'achgrus hasam ikatim der loyal b'binav. He's not learning out from b'binav. Elame hekish the zois teres abahema va'oif could come on barakatazoi. That's his first kasha that you're not. It's not a binyan av. You can't learn out that a binyan av, a kal v'chaymer followed by a binyan av, because it's not a binyan av. It's really a hekish. I mean, Meir Kra Ashkach V'Darsh. Inami to heavy the gamal of a binyan av, even if it would be a binyan av, because the tani masisin lemifshta bayin, it still would not answer our kasha. The Rameya Malika b'Kashim mishchita dechulin gomer. He's learning out Malika of Kashim mishchita dechulin. Havale melam b'dechulin. So it's something that's involving chulin. According to the mandama that we said before, we had the question of whether something that's being learned out from is not kodesh. That was a subject of dispute. According to the mandama who said that you can't learn out something that's what you're learning from is chulin, you can't learn out from. So there's nothing. It's not something to discuss. It's not going to be a ride. Let's do the last chelik. Davar lo binyanav maushi yomid behekish b'gzeir shavu b'kal v'chomer or binyanav. What's the din of learning out something that was first learned out of the binyanav to learn out with one of the four mahalachim? Pasha me'achad. Let's learn at least one of them. In Ma amrulan b'dam kosher. Why do we say that someone who leaves over dam that it's kosher that you don't have to take it off of the mizbeach if it was brought onto mizbeach by mistake? Shari lam be'emurim kosher, because we find by emurim if you left it out and it's past its time and it went on the mizbeach, that you don't have to take it off. Lam be'emurim kosher, and where do we know that lam be'emurim doesn't have to go off the mizbeach? Shari lam be'basar kosher. Because by the basar, the din is that it doesn't have to come off if it well, over there it's not that it went up on the mizbeach, but if it stayed past its time, that you could eat a shlamim past one day. Lon means past one night, and you're allowed to eat the basar of a shlamim for 2 days and one night. So it doesn't become puzzle after one day. So we see this is already the raya. We see that you did a binyanav followed by a binyanav. We learned out dam from emurim, and we learned that emurim from basar binyanav. So see, a binyanav can teach another binyanav. Now the brisa, we just continue at the end of the brisa. Yoitza, when something goes out, the emurim go out of the mikdash. Hayil v'yoitza kosher bebama. Since by a bama you can take the emurim out, so therefore we're not going to say it's possible and you can leave it on the mizbech. Tamei hayil v'huter ba'avodas tzibur, and tamei that went on the mizbech also will not have a din. You have to take it off because we find that that tum is hutra b'tzibur. Chutzos manai by pigul hayil meratzel pigula. Like we said, that even though the carbon really is possible, we say you still continue it. The gabi the dinim of pigul. Chutzlum kaimai hayal v'hokesh l'chutzlus mani, and chutzlum kaimai learn out from chutzlus mani. Shekiblu psul v'zarku daman. What about where a pasul a kayin was zarek the dam? So bahanach psul the chazul avodas tzibur. It's only those kaihanim that have chazul avodas tzibur, and I guess that means that avodas tzibur, like we said before, you have tamei is hutra. In fact, Mara. How could we learn out? We're going back to this is all action. Now we're going back to the original thing. How could you say we learned out dam from emurim and then we learned out emurim from basar? Basar are allowed to stay past one night. You're saying that tells you that if you left the emurim past its time, you don't take it off the mizbeach. Basar is l'chatchila supposed to be more than one night. He says, you learn it out from Zeis Tyrus. He learns it out from the pasuk, Zeis Tyrus Ayla. So Riba Samachle. That tells you that that anything that is, it's telling you that some of the things that are on the mizbeach are allowed to stay there, and some can't. That once they're brought up on the mizbeach, so we're just using this as a raya. It's not the actual source. This is just determining which are the things that are included in that other pasuk. So for that, you could even learn out from Hechshera. Okay, we're going to continue with the Mishnah tomorrow. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Wow.
Listen, I wasn't